Have you ever wondered if the holes in your cheese mean it's spoiled? When I started making cheese many years ago, I quickly noticed that many people in online cheese forums were worried that the holes in their cheese meant that they were contaminated. And if they ate those cheeses, that they would get sick or worse. But many of my cheeses looked exactly like the ones that the cheese making experts were advising people to throw out. And I was eating them and I wasn't getting sick. So what was the big deal about holes? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly why throwing away a cheese just because it has holes in it is the worst advice out there. How to spot the real danger signs, and I'm going to share some simple perspective keeping techniques so you can stop throwing away your perfectly good homemade cheese. But first, why are so many cheesemakers panicked that the holes in their cheese indicate contamination? Most people, at least in the United States, grow up removed from their milk source. Milk comes in plastic jugs from the dairy aisle of the grocery store. We're taught that it's nutritious, but also that it's potentially dangerous. Anything fancier than just pouring it over your cereal or using it to make lattes should be left up to the experts. And as for cheese making, forget about it. That requires a very scientific process that is only done by people in lab coats using test tubes and giant stainless steel vats. As a result, most people don't know how to ferment and preserve milk. And when you grow up in a world where you don't know anyone who makes cheese and you're surrounded by industry warnings about the dangers of improperly handled milk, it's only natural to be terrified of contamination. Contamination is a word that takes us from 0 to 100, instantly spiking our anxiety. And when our anxiety spikes, the logical part of our brain shuts down. Here, let's pretend that my fist is your brain. This right here is the amygdala, and this is the cerebral cortex. The cortex is the rational thinking part of your brain. It protects the amygdala, the more primitive part. Sometimes we are really angry or scared, we flip our lids, and then we do what animals do: fight, freeze, or we run away. This reaction is super helpful if a tiger is trying to eat us. But these days, most times, we're not in a life or death situation. Actually, what we need is to be able to think rationally and logically about the problems that we're dealing with so that we can make good choices. So it's really, really important that we find ways to stay calm. And one way we can do that is to switch from using the word contamination to the word problem. Now, my inspiration from this shift comes from David Asher. In his book, Milk into Cheese, he writes, "There is no such thing as contamination in a cheese. Contamination is a state of mind. If a cheese grows microorganisms that don't belong, it is because they seized upon an opportunity provided by the cheesemaker in their practice." So when you look at contamination as problems that you, as the cheesemaker, have the power to control and manipulate, it makes it a lot less scary. So now that we've dropped the C word from our vocabulary, let's get to the second technique that you can use while making cheese so you don't waste time and money making something that you're going to end up throwing away. And that's to understand why holes form in cheese. Just so you know, I have made an entire PDF with all the information that I'm sharing in this video that you can download. The link is below this video. There's a lot going on when making cheese, and I want to make it as easy as possible. So usually holes form because bacteria or yeast in the milk consume nutrients like lactose and citrate and produces a gas, which in turn creates the holes. These microorganisms might be naturally present or intentionally added to milk, or they might come in via the environment. Other factors that can influence holes in cheese are curd moisture, how the curds were placed in the mold, salt levels, aging temperatures, just to name a few. None of these reasons are inherently good or bad. They just are. Raw milk always contains a mix of good and bad bacteria. And in pasteurized milk, harmful bacteria can still be introduced at later stages. The problems occur when the bad bacteria outweigh the good bacteria. Cheese making is all about managing this bacterial balance through cultures, through salt, through aging temperatures, keeping the bad bacteria in check and allowing the good bacteria to flourish. Some examples of bad bacteria include Clostridia, Campylobacter, Staphylococcus, Listeria, Salmonella, probably more. They may already be present in the milk, or they can be introduced during the processing, and they can multiply during or after cheese making. Two of them, Listeria and Salmonella, are both invisible and odorless. This means that unless your cheeses are lab tested, there's always some uncertainty. Stop. Do you just feel your anxiety spike? Take a second and breathe. Everything's okay. As I was saying, There's always some uncertainty, but good practices greatly reduce these risks. The good thing is most unwanted bacteria reveal themselves through smell, through taste, through texture, appearance, and even through sound. There are two main times these issues can appear. If they come up during the make of the cheese, it's called early blowing, and if they appear weeks, months, maybe even a year or so later, that's called late blowing. But remember, just because a cheese is blowing doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It depends on the type of cheese you're wanting to make and the conditions. The undesirable forms of early blowing typically come from coliforms and yeast, or a combination of the two. And lucky for us, these issues are fairly easy to spot, especially if you know what to look for. Signs of early blowing caused by coliforms include the curds may rise and float on the whey as opposed to sinking under the whey. And this is a sign that unwanted gases are present and are causing the curds to be lighter and to rise to the surface. Or after pressing, you may notice that the cheese feels spongy, not as firm as it should be. And this can also be a sign that there are gases in the cheese. And sometimes if you press on it, you might hear a faint hiss as that gas is escaping. During brining, cheeses typically float in the brine, and usually the top of the cheese is flush or slightly above the brine. But if the cheese pops up out of the brine and it's really protruding, that's a sign that that cheese is filled with more gas, and that's making it more buoyant and light and shooting it up out of the brine. And then finally, during air drying, you might notice that your cheese appears slightly bloated or puffy, which is another giveaway that gas is being produced inside. If you suspect that something is wrong, cut the cheese in half. If coliforms are involved, you'll often see lots of tiny, irregular, elliptical holes, shiny and evenly dispersed throughout the cheese. Also, smell it. If this is coliforms in the cheese is probably going to smell bad. Sour or barnyard-like, or just generally yuck, as opposed to the clean, bright, lactic smell of a fresh cheese. It's not recommended that humans eat cheeses that have coliforms, but it's generally considered safe to feed those to your chickens or to your pigs, or to compost them. Now, the signs of early blowing caused by yeast can look similar to coliform-related issues. Floating curds or a puffy, spongy cheese due to the unwanted gas. But there are a couple differences. In a cheese that has yeast in it, the curds might feel slimy and a little bit tacky, and they often smell fruity or yeasty, very similar to how bread smells when it is rising. So if you have a formed cheese and you think there might be yeast in it and you cut into it, what you're going to see probably is a bunch of large irregular holes scattered throughout the cheese. These cheeses aren't necessarily unsafe to eat, they just don't taste good, they're unpleasant. I have heard of some cheese makers repurposing them in homemade crackers or in cheese fondue, or using that cheese as a base to make mozzarella. So it's kind of up to you. There is one thing I want to set straight. Many people believe that if they make sourdough and cheese at the same time, the yeast from the sourdough will get into the cheese. That is not true. I make sourdough and cheese at the same time in the same location all the time. In fact, I proof my sourdough bread in my cheese cave. I have never had problems with this. It's the heavy use of commercial yeast that can cause a problem when you're making cheese. So if you are using a lot of commercial yeast, maybe don't make cheese at the same time. I don't know. Sometimes there are no signs of issues during the making of the cheese, but later, weeks, months, maybe even a year after you've made the cheese, you notice that it begins to swell or deform unexpectedly, and this is called late blowing. The most common culprit is Clostridium, which is a spore-forming bacteria that ferments the lactose into butyric acid and carbon dioxide and hydrogen gases, thus creating the holes. Often late blowing results in large holes throughout the cheese, or sometimes just one cavernous hole in the middle of the cheese. I think this is called a blowhole. Clostridium can survive pasteurization, and then it can remain dormant, and if conditions allow, then it will come alive and ruin things. If Clostridium is involved, the cheese will smell rancid and off because of the butyric acid. Late blown cheeses should not be eaten, and you're not going to want to because they smell bad. And as to whether or not you feed them to your animals, that's up to you. It may be okay to do that, but also if you have Clostridium present, there's the chance that you have some other pathogens present that could cause greater damage. So just proceed with caution. So how can you prevent all these problems that I just talked about? Remember, cheese making is about managing the bacterial balance, starting with the milk, or actually before that even, starting with the animal. The healthier your process is, the greater your chances are of making great cheese. If you're struggling with problems, or if you're worried that you're going to be struggling with problems, here are some foundational questions that you can ask yourself. Is the animal healthy? Is the milking environment and the cheese making environment hot water and soap clean? If the milk is chilled before it is used for making cheese, is it being chilled quickly? Are the cultures being added to the milk in a timely manner? When the milk comes to the target temperature, it's really important that you add the cultures right away or a little bit before. And the reason for that is harmful bacteria tend to thrive at a higher pH or a less acidic environment. So the sooner you can drop the pH and make it more acidic, and that's what your cultures do, the less chance there is of these harmful bacteria surviving. Another question to ask yourself, is the cheese adequately salted? Salt inhibits microbial growth, so don't skimp on the salt. Now, if you're struggling with late blowing, here are a few things that you should consider. Clostridium is often linked to milk from cows that were fed silage or fermented grain. It is also linked to low salt levels in the cheese, excessive moisture, higher aging temps. So the solutions are mostly common sense. Don't use milk from cows that were fed silage. Make sure your cheeses are properly salted. Often milled curd cheeses like cheddars that have the salt added to them before they go into the press have a lower chance of developing late blowing because of that additional salt that is added earlier. So that's something you can try if you're having a problem. Also, just think about the conditions in which Clostridium thrive and then eliminate them. So for example, if your cheese is extra tall and it isn't quite salted properly because the salt can't penetrate into the center, that leaves the center core of the cheese unsalted. And then fermentation can happen there at a later point. And if the curds are undercooked or they're too moist, that excess water can promote the Clostridium. And then also because this bacteria prefers warmth, you can always err on the side of caution and age your cheeses at a slightly lower temperature. And if you're looking for a little added protection, I have read that certain producers routinely add lysozyme to their milk. And lysozyme is an enzyme that comes from egg whites and it inhibits the Clostridium. All this talk of holes and bacteria might have you thinking that holes are a bad thing, but many times they are perfectly normal, even desirable, even kind of, sexy. I'm going to show you how to get the good kind of holes so you can enjoy your gorgeous, holy cheeses without worrying that you're going to get sick. There are two kinds of holes, gas produced and mechanical. And often they both exist in the same cheese. Gas production is a natural part of cheese fermentation. Certain bacterial cultures are specifically chosen because of the type of gas that they will produce and the type of hole that they will make in the final cheese. For example, Lactococcus lactis subspecies diacetylactis, I might not be saying that right, is a culture that contributes to this light, airy, open texture in cheeses like Havarti and feta and blues. Other cultures like LM57 and aroma B and propionic bacteria are known for their gas production. Propionic Shermani is one that you may have used to make a Swiss style cheese. And then there are natural cultures like Kefir and Clabber that already contain many of these gas producing bacteria. Even just fresh unprocessed milk contains a lot of these gas producing bacteria. So under the right conditions, you can encourage them so that they can form the beautiful holes without needing to add commercial starter cultures to your milk. Now, because I use raw milk and Clabber, it's only natural that I have a lot of holes in my cheese. And that's totally fine with me. Mechanical holes are not good or bad, they simply are. And you can reduce or encourage them depending on how you handle the curds. For example, if you want a perfectly smooth, hole-free cheese, try pre-pressing the curds while they're still under the whey to help push out the trapped air and close the texture. I've never done this, but try it and let me know how it goes. On the other hand, if you want more holes, try draining and gently fluffing the curds before you put them in the mold. This extra step introduces tiny air pockets that can create a lovely open texture in the cheese. Some cheeses like blue cheese need these air pockets for the proper molds to grow. And then there's others like Colby that develop this open texture from washing the curds with a cold water wash prior to putting them into the mold. The problem is cheese making isn't always clear cut. There are a lot of gray areas. What do you do when you're on the fence about a cheese? When you're pretty sure the cheese is probably okay, but you just can't quite shake a niggling feeling that something might be off. This is the hard part, and I can't tell you what to do. I'm very reluctant to assess photos of other people's cheeses, and I will never tell anyone to eat something that they feel uneasy about. But what I can do is share the method that I use when I'm unsure. My method is a mix of practical steps and gut feeling. I call it the PENT method. The P stands for positive attitude. I approach the cheese with curiosity and goodwill. I know it sounds dorky, but it really helps if you don't assume the worst. Many times I thought a cheese is going to be terrible, and it's actually delicious and vice versa. So keep an open mind. The E stands for eyes. I examine it and I compare it to what I know a cheese should look like. The problem is, in the United States, we don't always have a very wide reference for artisanal cheeses, and the cheeses that we're making in our home are artisanal. Search European cheese shops online. Look at cheeses in other countries like in Argentina or South Africa or Saudi Arabia or Nicaragua. See what those cheeses look like and study them. Look at the rinds, look at the colors, the textures, the cracks, the holes. This practice helps broaden your visual library, train your eye, and it will open up your mind to the possibilities that are out there. The N, of course, stands for nose. I smell it. Early on, most of us don't know what our cheeses are supposed to smell like, and cheese making involves a wide variety of smells that are ever changing, and they're not always that pleasant. So it's really important that you smell, and you smell often, so that you can train your nose and begin to learn what is expected and what is not. The first T stands for touch. Is it squishy? Is it bouncy? Dense? Sticky? Cut into it. Does the interior of the paste feel like what you expected it to feel? Get to know what the different styles of cheeses are supposed to feel like, and this will help you know when something is off. And the last T stands for taste. I taste it. If I don't like how it tastes and I think it tastes bad, then I throw it out. If it's probably okay, but I'm still unsure, I wait a day and see how I feel. And then if I still feel good, I feed it to my family. And if in a day or two they still feel good, then I stop worrying about it. This pent method is not foolproof, but it's practical, it's grounded, and it's built on experience. So you can probably see from this method why I feel so uncomfortable assessing a photo of someone else's cheese on a computer screen. It's way too one-dimensional. Cheese making is complex. It's a craft, and part of that craft involves using all of our senses to make the cheese, and then also using all of our senses to assess the cheese. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our cheeses to not pass judgment without incorporating the whole picture. When I was researching for this video, I spent some time scrolling through online cheese forums where people post those photos of their cheeses and other people weigh in saying whether or not they think they're okay to eat. Within minutes, I was overwhelmed. Even with all my research and experience, I often couldn't tell what I was looking at. Was the cheese bad or was it just different? I had no idea. So you know what I did? I stopped. I don't go there anymore, usually. I try to stay away from those posts as much as possible. Am I being willfully blind? Yeah, I am a little. But we all do this when we're managing risk. For example, we all know that driving is dangerous, but we don't scroll through crash photos before every car ride. We follow basic safety rules. We wear our seatbelts. We put our phones away. We stay focused. It's the same with cheese making. Don't fixate on every worst case scenario or let fear messaging keep you from trying to make a cheese. Follow good practices. Stay curious. Trust your senses and practice, practice, practice. The more cheese you make, the more skilled and confident you'll become, and the more great cheese you'll get to eat.
Oh, yes. Yes!
I did it. I did it. If you want to practice with making a cheese that swells with all those good holes, then I recommend that you watch this video next. Happy milk slinging.